Rivals turned lovers. What a jackass. Those were my first 3 words when I met Casper. I didn't even need to tell him who I was talking about. He knew that already. He laughed and rubbed a hand on my head. What did he do this time? I looked over his shoulder and at the offending person. He just exists. Casper grinned. He isn't all that bad, Will. I would have believed you 2 years ago. I rolled my eyes at my enemy and then grabbed my duffel bag. Say, you wouldn't happen to be hungry? Casper grinned. Let me bring you to my favorite cafe. I grinned at him. Yes, sir. Before walking out of the stadium, I looked at the offending man, Elias, and glared at his broad back. As if he could feel the heat of my glare, Elias turned to me and glared back. Well, at least the feelings were mutual. I huffed and followed after Casper. Casper's favorite cafe happened to be the cutest on the street. It was quite fashionable and aesthetic. But the one thing that I liked the most about it was the fairy lights hanging along the walls. It was a routine of mine to touch them each time we entered the cafe, a habit that Casper had noticed quite quickly in our early stage of friendship. The lights were hung higher today. I tried to reach them, but I just couldn't. A few inches too tall, I said to Jasper. He grabbed my hand, gently pulled me up to the balls of my feet, and poked the fairy lights with it. He grinned. Only a few inches taller, Casper, don't act bold. A few inches too tall. The same? He asked and ordered before I could answer. I found us a table, and he followed me soon after with our orders. He placed them on the table and then informed me about the current status of his team. Casper belonged to the swim team. The swim team was doing well, sometimes even better than us, even though we belonged to 2 different sports on totally different spectrums. And although the entire team was star-studded, in a way, I couldn't help but feel a little hung up on Casper. As I sucked on my straw, I couldn't help but think about the attractive way he furrowed his eyebrows, or the slight twitch of his mouth whenever he thought my responses were too amusing. The fact that he was conventionally kind of attractive didn't help either. Sometimes, looking at him felt like I was looking at a painting. To entertain him and keep that light in his eyes, I responded the way I usually did. My support seemed to manifest something in him. He seemed to come alive. I guess that was the only thing where I had the upper hand between us. Casper didn't seem to mind it either. He seemed to understand what I was already thinking, and so he stopped mid-rant to ask me about my sports and the latest gossip. Before I even opened my mouth and thought of how I was going to respond, one particular name popped up in my head. I scowled. Casper laughed. Please, not Elias again. It's him, Casper. I can't talk about him enough. Casper sipped his coffee. He seems to be on your mind all the time, he noted, something that he seemed to do a lot around me. He noted precisely each and every time. He seems to have you wrapped around his finger. Even though he was probably only teasing, I couldn't help but notice the way he bit down on his bottom lip, with a slight furrow between his brows. But I moved past that reaction quickly enough. He does not have me wrapped around his finger, okay? So, he stopped to think for a while. You have him wrapped around yours? I opened and closed my mouth. No one had anyone wrapped around their finger, I told him. Elias is just annoying as hell, and everyone deserves to know that. You won't believe what he did today. What did he do? He asked. So, I missed one time, alright? It was one time, I began. It wasn't one time, but Casper didn't need to know that. And the loser shouted, "Dumbass," so loudly that even the coach laughed. Oh, Casper replied. It was humiliating, Casper. Everyone knew that. Why did you have to shout and make it worse? I moaned desperately and sadly. We're not close enough for him to say stuff like that. You're the team captain, he reminded me for the nth time, but he still sounded amused. Teach him some discipline. That stupid guy then pointed at me and said that I'm gonna cost us a match someday. Okay, that's not funny, Casper agreed. I made a sound at that. Casper was right. This wasn't funny, and Elias deserved to know that. If Elias gave me a minute of his time tomorrow, I was sure gonna let him know what I thought of him. I'm sure that would work wonders for his ego. Stupid, depraved man, I couldn't help but huff when his face popped into my head. Do you want me to drop you off? Casper asked. I looked outside. The weather seemed cold and it was dark. When I checked the time, it was past 10 o'clock. Mom and Dad were surely gonna raise hell. I had missed 3 of my dad's calls. Yep, I looked at Casper and innocently grinned at him. He laughed. Again, Will, shouldn't you make an effort to pick up the calls, man? I didn't notice, I defended myself. I'll inform them now. Bring me to yours. My house is a mess right now, he answered. We'll have to share a bed. That's alright, I answered and got up. Let's go. I dialed my dad's number and nearly missed the slight flush on Casper's cheeks. Although he followed after me, I couldn't help but think that was the only way I had the upper hand in our friendship. My friend really got flustered over nothing. The next day, I found Elias in the changing room. He was only in a towel and rolling his neck side to side. When I found him so relaxed, I couldn't help but moan those days when I made his life a living hell. Okay, this is an exaggeration, but I was allowed to do that when it came to him. Take a picture, it'll last longer, he said. I rolled my eyes. I was looking around for my phone. And that's not in your hands, I assume? He opened his eyes to look at me. Although he was nearly naked, it was I who felt underdressed in my shorts and t-shirt. I rolled my shoulders and glared at him. It shamed me to know that he won that one, but I still had some things to say to him. Listen, I have something to say. Oh, insults, I assume? He stretched his arms over his head. Go on, bark. I opened and closed my mouth. When I insulted him, I did not bark. He looked at me in amazement. Are you really here to stare at me all day? Listen, I said, and pulled myself from my stupid haze. Yesterday, you called me a dumbass in front of all of our teammates and the coach, and I didn't like it. He smirked a little. Oh, thanks for the review. I'll improve it next time. No, I said. I'm telling you that so you don't call me it again. Okay, he replied. And you believe I would do that because... There it was. He got me again. There was no reason I wanted to do that, except the fact that I couldn't, for the life of me, stand up to any kind of humiliation. Getting humiliated while being the team captain? Yep, that was a nightmare for me. Even so, I pulled my best card. Because I, as team captain, said so. Oh, he said flatly. I feel threatened, Captain. He got up from the bench and stalked his way to me. I was not intimidated by him, even though he was a few inches taller than me. It was hellish that he had the upper hand there. It was like a personal insult from God himself. I just hope you're not going to be this annoying on the trip, man. I purposely didn't tip my head up to stare at him, but that was just impossible, and I couldn't hold it anymore. I opened my mouth to deliver a sharp reply, but he dismissed me before I could utter a single word. Just don't show your face and we'll be fine. He pulled away and turned the other way to look for his stuff. That should have been my cue to leave, but I didn't. Why? Well, because I was stupid. With another set of burning insults in my head, I swiftly walked close to him, only to trip over some shoes. With nothing to balance myself, I fell on his back, and he stumbled and muttered a few curses. I was still on his back, trying to regain some balance, when he turned around and held me around my hips. I didn't want to say it, but his touch was both outrageous and intimate. I did what I could do best in that position, even though it was my mistake. I glared. Are you a child? He asked and sounded genuinely curious. I took a second too long to reply, as if I were actually wondering if I were one. Shut up, I said. Who keeps their shoes right in the middle of the— Don't you have eyes? He asked flatly. I could have lost mine because of you, little boy. I flushed red with shame. The hooks, sure, could have seriously hurt him, but it wasn't like I did that to hurt him. It was an accident. I'm sorry, I said, being the brave person that I was. If it were him, I was sure he wouldn't have even thought of apologizing. It wasn't my intention, okay? Just then, the door snapped open and Casper came into sight. He seemed to be in the middle of saying something before he stopped at the sight of us. I pushed myself away from Elias. Elias groaned a little, probably hurt somewhere, but I didn't have the patience to apologize again. Hey Casper, is everything all right? Yeah, I replied and smiled at him. You were saying something? I purposely didn't look at Elias. He had stood up and was wearing his cool branded stuff. The buses are here. We'll leave in 15. Okay, we'll sit by each other. Elias snorted somewhere behind me. I decided not to give him attention for once. Casper apologetically smiled. Unfortunately, we cannot. He then informed me about the bus arrangements and how the buses were allocating according to the teams and sports. So by that rule, both the female and male swimming teams would be on the same bus, and the same would happen for football. All my excitement for the trip had all gone. And that was how Elias and I were forced to sit side by side on the bus. Oh, Elias said an hour into the ride. Fancy meeting you again. I rolled my eyes. Remind me, who are you again? But for the most part, it was silent between us. I didn't really know how to talk to him without insulting him left and right, and I assumed it was the same for him. Other people, though, were more energetic and excited than us. They had plans that they were going to fulfill the moment they reached the hotel. I would have joined in on their conversations, if not for Elias. This dude was blocking my view. For the first time in my life, I hated a window seat. When there was nothing else to do, I stared out the window. My stomach must have growled sometime later because Elias nudged a packet of chips in my direction. I looked down at the packet and then at him. We're about to arrive, so you can have good stuff there, but, just make do with this for now. I didn't know you were so kind, I muttered and grabbed the packet. I'm not kind, you're just pathetic. I made a face at that, but didn't say anything. I was hungry, and I wasn't going to refuse it for the sake of some lame banter. Thanks, I said. He replied, but at least there was a pleased smile on his face. When we finally reached the hotels, Casper came to see me, but it was Elias who informed me of his presence. He nudged me with his shoulder and said, "Your boyfriend's waiting on you," and then he stepped out of the bus. I would have replied to his jab, but I was too flustered to reply. I looked at Casper and waved at him. Hopefully, I'd get to share a room with him. Maybe I would finally get the chance to kiss him. But obviously, the universe was not on my side. Coach? I began as politely as possible. This doesn't fucking make sense. Language, my coach said kindly, and yes, this does make sense. We've received several complaints about you two, so please, don't try to deny it, Elias, and we understand this is the best way to make it better. Rooming us won't make a difference, Elias said flatly. And you have to make sure it does, our coach answered strictly. This is good for the team. You both occupy important positions on this team, and you're fully responsible for how the team behaves. For the next 1 week, you two will room together. By the time we leave, I want you two to be on your best behavior. He looked behind us. Next. We can ask someone to swap, I suggested to Elias. If anyone does that, they'll be grounded for the next important match, the coach announced. Enjoy your trip, lads. I'll see you in the evening. Elias merely huffed, grabbed his backpack, and hauled it all to the elevator. I turned around and helplessly looked at Casper. He seemed to mirror my disbelief and irritation. Well, at least he was handsome. Let's first get you settled, he said. Thanks. Where are you rooming? A few doors away from you, he answered, and we waited for the elevator. Honestly, I said as Casper and I strolled in the open evening air, I was expecting a lot more than this. This was not letting me down. The hotels were beautiful, and the staff was amazing. They informed us that there was a beach just 10 minutes away, and the weather seemed sweet as well, but I was still expecting a lot more. Casper seemed to have read my mind. Wild parties? Ladies? He asked the last one carefully. I do feel there's a lack of... He trailed off. I nearly grinned. Didn't Casper know I wasn't interested in women? But I assumed he would think so. I had never dated anyone in recent times. Heck, I couldn't even think back to a time when I was in a relationship. But that was only because I was interested in Casper, and my annoyance for Elias ran so deep that I never really got the chance to date anyone, much less Casper. I don't care for ladies, Casper, I told him. Parties would have been nice. He grinned brightly, and all tension seemed to leave his body immediately. His crush was so obvious. It was almost as if I could feel the wild tremors of excitement in me. As we strolled along the stone paths, I couldn't help but notice each time our hands grazed each other's. Sometimes it was intentional, other times it seemed to happen naturally. And then it got so common that by the end of our walk, we were holding hands. And because it seemed so natural to hold his hand and joke with him, it didn't really come as a surprise to me when he leaned down to press a kiss against my cheek. We were in the hotel hallway when he did that. It was past 10, so the area was silent, save for the nearly muted television noise. Casper said and rubbed his nape. Because of his tall stature and broad frame, he looked funny and yet relaxed when he did that. It's alright, I told him. Yeah? He asked and blushed a little. I nodded at him. It's alright because I'm gonna do this. I stopped and got on the balls of my feet to lean closer. I waited a few seconds for his permission, and when instead of pulling back, he merely looked excited, I pressed a kiss on his lips. I pulled back and looked at him. He opened and closed his mouth like a hapless fish before huffing out a laugh. I did the same, and it seemed like the perfect moment that I could have. But then I heard an annoyed sound behind me and turned to find Elias standing at the doorway of our hotel room. What? I asked. When you come back, make sure to close the door softly. And why? I raised my eyebrow. Because I'm trying to sleep, loser. Then he walked in and slammed the door shut. What an annoying jerk, I huffed. I turned to Casper. I'll probably need to leave as well, he said, and rubbed a hand on my cheek. When I leaned into the touch, he smiled softly. My roommate's an early sleeper. Eric will kill me if I disturb his sleep. I get it, I replied. Let's check out the beach tomorrow? I nodded. He smiled and kissed me again, and then pulled back with a sigh. His gaze seemed to linger on my mouth for a moment too long, but even then, he stepped back and bid me a good night. When I walked into my hotel room, I closed the door softly, but when I walked into the bedroom, I saw Elias watching TV. He was lying on his bed and watching TV. Didn't he say he was going to sleep? I narrowed my eyes on him. He didn't look at me, but opened his mouth to mutter, "Didn't know you guys were kiss buddies." His voice was still flat, so it was hard to detect his emotions. I couldn't fathom what he meant by that. Why do you care? He didn't reply for the longest time, but when I finally lay down on my bed, ready to go to sleep, he finally spoke up. Swimmer and footballer, classic. "Didn't know you ship us," I sarcastically replied, but I was so sleepy I couldn't be sure if that did sound sarcastic. "I don't," he replied and switched off the TV. I heard him shuffling on his bed. The next time I opened my eyes, it was past 10 in the morning. I stretched and yawned and sat up on the bed. Somehow, when I found breakfast on the bedside table and some messages on my phone, I didn't feel surprised. In a way, I knew this was coming. Now, I wasn't sure what this was, but the universe wasn't going to give me much time to deliberate upon that. Apparently, I just had to feel. In the late afternoon, Casper and I decided to go check out the beach, and for whatever reason, Elias came to us and asked if he could join us. Casper didn't have the same kind of rivalry that I did with Elias, and so after a minute of contemplation, Casper said yes to him. When they turned to me, I couldn't think of a valid excuse, so I said yes. And that was how I found us three at the beach, and me wondering why the heck I was feeling conflicted in the first place. Each time Casper pressed a kiss against my mouth or neck, I couldn't help but search Elias's eyes, and each time Casper kissed me, I would always find Elias looking at us. It was strange. I had never seen him so silent and yet disapproving. He seemed annoyed, but I couldn't fathom why our kisses were annoying him. When Casper went to grab us some beers in the late evening, Elias scooted close to me and asked the question I was sure was weighing him down. "So, you and Casper, huh?" I replied because, well, I was dumb like that. "You guys boyfriends?" Elias asked again. He didn't need to know any of that, but something in me was still compelled to answer him decently. "No, we are not boyfriends," I began. "We kiss, though." "That's like the start of a relationship, though." I shrugged. Why was he asking me all of this? What was the meaning behind his question, was he? Oh no, was he interested in Casper? I nearly gasped. "Do you like Casper?" I asked in an annoyed tone. "Oh, heck no," Elias rolled his eyes. He leaned on his hands and stared up at the rapidly darkening sky. "I'm not interested in that dumb swimmer." "Right, the only intelligent person around here is you," I rolled my eyes. He tisked. "I'm dumb too." "Nice," I replied. "I'm dumb because if I wasn't dumb, I wouldn't want it." He trailed off. When I didn't say anything, he turned his head towards him. Now there was that glint in his eyes, the same glint that often gave me whiplash whenever I was around him, the same glint that made it hard for me to move past this stupid rivalry we had running in between us. Strangely, this glint suited his face, and I hated how quick I was to calculate his facial expressions, and how handsome they made him look. "You wouldn't want to what?" I asked. He swallowed a little and kept staring at me. "You're not ugly," he said suddenly, and although his confession was soft, I couldn't help but feel dumbfounded. Because what the heck did he mean by that? Hello? What the hell's wrong with... I stopped when he brought his hand near my face. He waited a few seconds before he swiftly, but extremely gently, brushed aside the loose fringes over my eyes. Unfortunately, the sunlight fell just about right on his frame, and it made him look like some kind of Greek god, except Elias was white. It wasn't until I heard Casper's brilliant voice behind us that I realized that I'd been holding my breath. I gasped a little and pulled away from Elias's touch. "Beers, guys," Casper said, and nudged Elias away with his feet. Dutifully, Elias grabbed his beer and sat a little away from us. He didn't say anything else except a thank you to Casper, but that was probably for the beer, and definitely not for leaving me with Elias for like 15 minutes. I wondered what that meant if it was the latter. Instead of saying thank you to Casper, I kissed him with my mouth full of beer. Elias huffed a little at the sight of it and left us alone. Well, at least Casper kissed me some more on my neck in his absence. Did I enjoy it? Heck yes, I might have even giggled. On the second day, we went to the beach again. On the third day, Elias fell sick. It was the middle of the night when I heard him whimpering on his bed. I woke up, switched on the lights, and pressed the back of my hand on his forehead. His body was a little warm. He had a running fever. I gently nudged him awake and then helped him drink some water. He seemed a little dizzy, but when I told him I'd call our coach, he shook his head and asked to let it be. But what if it gets worse? I asked worriedly. It'll be fine, he said. It always gets better in a couple of hours. We can't risk that. It's just a fever, Will. It'll be all right. He lay down on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. He was acting so dramatic. It was almost like he was on his deathbed. The groaning and whimpering did not help. Can I ask you something? I replied and sat on the edge of my bed. Strangely, I wasn't annoyed that my sleep schedule was messed up by him. I only felt worried about him. I wished I could call Casper here. If I were to die, say tomorrow, would you kiss me goodbye now? Hey, I thought, what kind of question was that? Was he fantasizing about dying while being sick with a fever? This man was delirious. Are you fantasizing about dying? I'm fantasizing about getting kissed by you. He rolled his head towards me. Despite the dim lighting, I could still see the innocent bewilderment on his face. It really was the first time I'd seen him like that. It was almost like I was seeing all of him. Yep, sounds weird, doesn't it? You can only imagine how weirded out I feel by actually truly wanting that? God, I didn't see that coming. I opened and closed my mouth in confusion. Was this man for real? You want me to kiss you? He shrugged, but didn't say anything. He was probably embarrassed. I mean, I would be too. We had spent most of our first year spitting hate on each other. I couldn't even remember why this rivalry had started in the first place. And it wasn't like either of us were doing worse than the other. I was the team captain and he was the star quarterback. But wanting a kiss from me? I bit my bottom lip. The real question was, why did I not feel upset or annoyed? Elias wasn't looking at me anymore. He looked as though he was back to sleep. I looked at him for some time and drummed my fingers against my thigh. The kind of thought I had in my head was dangerous, and yet I couldn't stop myself from sitting on his bed and dropping a kiss on his cheek. That was the best I could do, and I was sure I was going to inform Casper about this. Elias, for his part, thanked me and returned to sleep. But I was worried about him. Didn't they say dying people knew that death was near or something? Because I was so worried and afraid for him that I decided to stay awake. By the time the morning came, Elias was all well again. I came to Casper's room and asked if I could sleep on his bed. His roommate, another swimmer, excused himself. I told Casper about what happened, and the kiss, and he replied by embracing me and sleeping with me. Thank God, it felt nice to be hugged by Casper. The rest of the trip went smoothly. We returned to uni and went back to studying and practicing. Weirdly, there was no old banter between Elias and I. We seemed to get along well, and almost all day passed without us being at each other's necks. The coach seemed the happiest among us all because of the team's performance, and I realized our rivalry and bantering was actually threatening the team's spirit. Well, at least now we had the awareness to work on it. A few days after the trip, I found Elias in the changing room. He was once again in just a towel and staring up at the ceiling. I couldn't recount the number of times I'd seen him just like this week. He seemed to be thinking about something, and I was ready to crack a joke on him when he looked at me and found my eyes. "The meeting's today?" he asked. I shook my head and sat down in front of him. I stretched my legs and nearly touched his in the process. The thought brought heat to my cheeks. "It's tomorrow." "Okay," he replied and looked up. "Elias, was it you who left those sandwiches at my desk?" Immediately, he swallowed and flushed a little. It was going to be hard for him to deny it after that, and although he took his sweet time to answer me, I already knew that it was him. Casper had left me some sandwiches in my bag early this morning. Elias had done the same in the afternoon. My recent meetings with the coach regarding the upcoming tournament took too much time. I often didn't have the time to eat, and these two guys, Casper and Elias, seemed to notice it. "I thought you didn't have lunch." "I didn't," I confirmed, "so thank you, for the sandwiches." He nodded and set his mouth in a tight line. "You're welcome." It's my birthday tomorrow. Would you like to come? Oh, he said and looked at me. I'm not celebrating or anything, I clarified. Casper and I are going to an adventure park tomorrow. If you want, you can tag along. He huffed. Aren't you guys, like, dating or something? I shrugged. We weren't dating. We did hang out together and kiss a lot. We'd even slept together a few times, but we hadn't named it yet. I knew I liked Casper, and I had told him that much, but I still felt like I needed to wrap up something else before jumping into a relationship with Casper, and I also knew it was utterly important. We aren't dating, I told him. We're going out, but we're not dating, if that makes sense, I added. He gave a little laugh. That doesn't really, but okay. There's just something that I need to clear up before doing anything. All right, he said. I've told Casper about it too, and he sounded pretty weirded out by it, but he said it was all right with him if I wanted to, check a few things first. He definitely did not know what I was saying. All right, he repeated anyway. So Casper and I kiss, but we're not dating. Okay, and he's okay with the invitation? I nodded at him. He shrugged and promised he'd be there. Then, when he stood up, I stood up too. We were close now, given the tight space, so I could feel the rapid way his heart was beating. It was almost as if I had the same kind of effect on him that I've had on Casper. And was it really the kiss on his cheek and the reduction of insulting words between us that had brought the change? I couldn't be sure. For one thing, I knew I wouldn't have said the things I was going to say before that stupid trip, and I knew even Elias knew that, but I'd already talked to Casper about it, and I couldn't hide it from Elias anymore. I needed to clear the thought away before it became a part of me. But really, did any of this actually make sense? I like you, I told him. What? He asked and furrowed his eyebrows. I got on the balls of my feet and placed a kiss on his mouth. There it was, the same feeling I had when I'd kissed Casper. What the heck was going on here? Elias seemed dumbfounded, but not displeased. I like you, and I told Casper the same, and I don't know why. I confessed with a lost look. I don't know why I like you, because I was sure I hated you, but apparently that wasn't hate, and now I like you? You like me, he said flatly. Shit, does that mean you'll do everything I say and want just because you like me? That's awesome. His tone was still flat. Although his tone was flat and his face lacked, well, any expression, I couldn't help but notice that glint in his eyes. I knew he liked what he heard, but that wasn't the only important thing he was going to hear today. There was something else that I needed to tell him. There's something else. You know that already, but I want to discuss it with you anyway because it's important, I said. Jeez, he muttered and sighed and then leaned over me. It was almost like he draped himself over me. The slight frame advantage really worked in his favor. What the hell? It didn't take him 5 minutes to accept that I liked him? Was it so easy just to move on with it? If it was, then why didn't he say so or do anything before? Do you want me to kiss you now that you like me? He asked and looked down at my lips, probably thinking of the last kiss I left on his mouth. I rolled my eyes. Even though I could feel the heat on my cheeks, I really wanted him to know the other thing. We couldn't possibly move on without that. Yes, I would love to be kissed by you, but I pulled my face away when he tried to kiss me. It's important. I want you to hear it before you do anything. He furrowed his eyebrows. Are you a woman? Are you pregnant? What? I like Casper, I replied to cut off his stupid curiosity. Too, but you know that already, I added. Elias looked like he had completely forgotten about it. Right, I forgot about him. He stepped away from me a little and grabbed his shift from one of the hooks. Of course, how could I forget him? Honestly, it was because of him that I felt... He stopped and sucked on his bottom lip. Well, you like him, then why are you here? Too, I added, as if that would help lift the gigantic weight that I had just confessed. I like you, and I like him. I like you both, and that's why I'm here. That doesn't make sense, he replied. I thought we were the only ones in the changing room, but then, that's exactly what I told him, came Casper's voice from somewhere. We jumped a little, and then turned to find Casper standing just a few feet away with a skull on his face. He was glaring at Elias. And then I told him he should just come with me. We can do life without you. Go away, man. I'm confused as it is, Elias groaned. No, it's not just your business. Will likes me. Too, I added tiredly. Man, this was getting more tiring with every second. Why was it happening anyway? I liked Casper, and I'd known that for ages. He was the sweetest guy I'd known since my college years. He made sense. but then came Elias, and apparently the way we moved had made him attractive to me. Then the trip had happened, and so did the moments that we shared. That sick night aside, I realized on that trip how much I liked spending time with Elias when we weren't pulling each other's legs. And I knew I made little sense here, and I also knew that I was in danger of losing them both. But even then, I said the first thing that came to my mind. Tomorrow's my birthday, and I wanted to spend time with both of you. My voice was tired, and I'm sure I looked ashamed. Elias and Casper stopped mid-argument to look at me. I know what I've said sounds like nonsense, but I knew the moment I kissed Casper that I wanted to be with him. And then I knew the same thing when I took care of Elias when he fell sick, and every moment after that seemed to cement my belief that I just couldn't choose between either of you. Then we returned from the trip, and I thought it would get better, but it hasn't. Elias and Casper didn't reply. I feel embarrassed, I feel greedy, and like I'll be there, Will, Casper promised. I looked at Elias, but he didn't seem to want to say anything, and I didn't force him. It was alright if he heard my confession and still didn't want to be with me. Just because I felt divided about him didn't mean he was compelled to respond to my confession positively. I sighed and grabbed my bag from the bench. Some smell then irritated my nose, and I knew a sneeze was coming long before it wrecked my body. I sneezed loudly and then rubbed my nose. Jeez, I said, feels like a fever's coming. When I opened my eyes, I found 2 hands, offering me 2 different napkins. When I looked up, I found Elias and Casper giving each other grave looks. Uh-huh, I said. What the heck was going on? The end. Liking 2 people at the same time can be a tricky situation. What other moments do you think Will spent with Elias and Casper to feel so much for both of them? Thanks for watching, and consider subscribing to become a part of our Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.